All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be my video reviewing about the Roaring Twenties. So, in your concept map, it breaks down three important ways of looking at what we call the Roaring Twenties. The first is culture, the next is legal changes, and the final is economic shifts. And this isn't organized the exact same way that your readings have been, so it'll be a different way of internalizing the information. So, and I'm just going to go through the concept map, and it should align to what you see in the key points and the key causal links at the bottom. So culturally, the Roaring Twenties is known for the rise of the Jazz Age, is where you think Great Gatsby, and the Harlem Renaissance. It is also known for the rise of something called Tin Pan Alley. And Tin Pan Alley is the creation of a music industry. What you don't see here is the rise of Hollywood. So if you think of like another place where culture is being created, this is more concerning the East Coast, but often the West Coast, we're creating Hollywood and developing a movie industry. And you can read the causal links to see what each of these things are. However, at the same time, we're having this surgence of like popular and high culture of literature and art and music and film. We are also seeing culturally a rise in social and racial conservatism. And this looks like the Red Scare, which we watched a video about in class, and the rise of anti-communism, or rather the resurgence of anti-communism after World War I, because we already learned that communism existed prior to this first Red Scare. We also see it in terms of the Scopes monkey trial, which you watched a video about today, which is about whether or not evolution should be taught in schools. And so in a debate in American culture basically about whether or not Christian values particularly, or Judeo-Christian values around the concept of evolution and where does life start, what would be taught in schools. So we have anti-communism, which leads to the Sacco and Vanzetti trial, where two Italian men who had links to anarchists are tried for murder despite having alibis that place them in other spaces, and wind up being found guilty and given the death penalty. As an example of this Red Scare. Something you don't see on here in terms of the Red Scare is the Palmer raids, which we read about. Palmer was going in and doing illegal searches, seizures, deportations of people he believed to be anarchists, communists, or socialists. And then we have the Scopes monkey trial again, and then the rise of the KKK. So we learned about the KKK first during Reconstruction, when the organization came into being. But remember that President Grant, as part of his role in Reconstruction, actually sends federal troops into the South and largely dismantles the Ku Klux Klan. That's what KKK stands for. And so it's not until after World War I and after the rise of imperialism, when we start having larger numbers of immigrants into the nation, that the KKK resurge. And the KKK at this time are, as they are known, white supremacists, which meant that they were anti-black, but that also meant that they were anti-immigrant, anti-Jewish, and anti-Catholic. It was really a movement that responded to white Protestant fear that they would lose control, social and political control of the nation. Okay, so then from culture, we move to what are the legal responses, legal changes that we see in the 1920s. And one of the major changes is prohibition. Now remember, when we were learning about the antebellum period, we learned about temperance. That was the movement to abolish the consumption, that means to drink, and sale of alcohol. And temperance was a space where women first started to get a lot more political voice. That's what we learned about in the antebellum period. It was a way for women to get political voice and led them to start to organize more towards women's rights with things like the Seneca Falls Convention. But specifically, we're looking at temperance and its outcome in the 1920s, which was the 18th Amendment. This is an amendment that prohibited the sale and consumption of alcohol. Now, this is really important because it is one of the only amendments to ever have been repealed. It winds up being repealed in the 21st Amendment in the 1930s. But for this moment in the early 20s, alcohol has been prohibited, which means selling it and making it and drinking it is illegal, which leads to the rise of organized crime. Organized crime comes about because people still want to consume alcohol. Not everybody was pro-temperance. So people still want to consume alcohol, and they have to find a way to get the alcohol. Most of the mob is built then on either the production of alcohol, so people who make the liquor, or the transportation of alcohol, or the distribution. So the people who own what we call speakeasies, which are the illicit or illegal underground clubs created in cities and in rural areas around the country in order to consume the illegal alcohol. Something else that we see in terms of amendments that happened in the 20th century is women gaining the right to vote. And so we pulled this down from the Seneca Falls Convention, which is the first convention of women organized around the idea of women's right to vote, and the start of the women's suffrage movement that eventually, right, because of women's involvement in larger political issues like the temperance movement, leads to a groundswell of support around giving women the right to vote in the 19th Amendment. That's the 19th Amendment says that there cannot be a discrimination based on the basis of gender for voting. And what we also see that we don't really have pictured here is the new woman, the flapper, the woman who drinks and she smokes, she uses birth control. She's radically different from the woman involved in the cult of domesticity, which was the housewife whose major role was to take care of the family and raise wholesome American children to be good American adults. So going from that cult of domesticity to the flapper, who is more individualistic, more concerned with her own happiness. Though to be fair or to be accurate, the flapper model, while it has become very popular in American literature, The Great Gatsby, think of I forgot his wife's name, but the women of Gatsby are really exemplars of this flapper ideal. Josephine Baker, another woman that we think of when we think of the flapper. Though these women did exist, by and large, women were still relegated to roles inside the home, still expected to follow the cult of domesticity and therefore to marry, have children, raise good American families. So though women gain the right to vote, and though there is some shifts in ideals around who women should be and what roles they should have in American society, by and large, for most women, the values around how they should act do not change. Finally, we get to the economics of the 1920s. We start off with the return to normalcy, which is at the end of World War I in 1919, after Wilson's defeat by Congress and the end of the Treaty of Versailles and us not signing on to the League of Nations. The American population wants to return to an isolationist policy, which means that we don't want to be as involved in Europe. And we want to go back to what we think is the good old days of America. And it's going to look very much like the Gilded Age that we learned about, where we have laissez-faire economic policies, which means the government basically does not regulate industry and is in more support of big business and business owners than it is workers' rights and labor unions. So these laissez-faire economic policies go hand in hand with the rise of Republican presidents. The Republican presidents are pro-business, and they are in favor of laissez-faire economics. So on top of the laissez-faire economic policy, we also have Republican presidents who are creating economic policies like the Haley-Smoot tariff, and who are getting caught up in a lot of scandals. William D. Harding is the president who we most associate with these scandals, particularly the Teapot Dome scandal, where his Secretary of Interior accepted money for the leasing of government land to private corporations, not something that was legal at the time. Another thing that intersects with these economic policies and the shift in presidential ideals around how the economy should function was the unrestrained financial speculation, which is particularly gambling on the stock market, so that people would, with not very much knowledge of the stock market, invest in companies in order to make a small amount of profit, pull their money out very quickly, so that the price and value of stocks would fluctuate extremely over hours or days, making the stock market fairly unreliable. So a couple of things that I want to add that we don't see on the list is here at social and racial conservatism. I want you to have something about nativism, right? A box that says nativism and quotas, so that during this time period we see a surge of anti-immigrant laws being passed, particularly creating quotas. That means a limit to the number of people who can immigrate to the nation. And so there are quotas. There's a Quota Act in 21 that says only 350,000 people can immigrate from Southern or Eastern Europe. And in 24, that number drops with the new act down to 150,000. We also see the Mexican Repatriation Act passed, which tells, basically rescinds or takes away the citizenship of Mexican Americans living in southeastern United States, so Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, parts of California, and says that in fact they are Mexican and they need to go back to Mexico. And so we basically create a law that revokes the citizenship of people living within the United States and create a system by which we attempt to push them back into the state of Mexico. So the nativism that we've been learning about, which led to like the Chinese Exclusion Act back in the Gilded Age, has manifested itself pretty severely with quota systems for immigration and even attempts to revoke the citizenship of some Americans. Okay, so we have our new women, organized crime, Sacco and Vanzetti. I think that's all of the things that I wanted you to know about. So now I'm just going to scroll down so you can see how I highlighted my document. So the yellow is what I thought was important. The red, simply I wanted you to know that the state means the government. The green is vocabulary terms that you should know. The KKK is the Ku Klux Klan. We don't have a vocab term on them, but you should know who they are. The temperance movement we have learned about. If you don't remember what progressive reforms are, you should go back. That's right here, progressive reforms. And then this is what I had for the vocab. You can pause the video if you so choose in order to get the highlighting. Most of these things we've gone over in class at this point. I didn't highlight this one. Involvement in regulating industry. All right. Engaging in risky that work to make money quickly, but ultimately unstable. There you go. That's speculation. Okay, so that is my video on the 20s.